Welcome to the BYOB podcast. Today we have my brother on the podcast, who obviously I've known for a long time, but he's a very successful person in his field of expertise. And I invited him on the show because he's gone through the same process that a lot of our customers have been through, which is pivoting from working for others to working for himself, and built quite a successful and large business. So he's gratefully decided to come onto the show. He's a very busy man, and I'll let him introduce himself after I say welcome, Jon Ford.
Thanks, Andy. Yes, as president of the Collingwood Football Club. No, actually, I'm not. I'm the managing director of Advanced Healthcare. So we're a healthcare group of specialist doctors, specialist pain physicians, psychologists, and physiotherapists. I'm a physiotherapist by training. And we help people with severe chronic pain to get their lives back on track.
Yeah, and you've been doing that for quite a while now. And I always remember when you pivoted to doing that, I was sort of like, that's so different, because in my mind, I thought of you as a physio, but it's branched down into, a much more complicated area. And I do want to go into that in a minute. But you also do quite a range of other things that I thought is of interest to people. So, you're very sporty, you've got other, you're involved in research and teaching. So maybe just talk a little bit about that. And then I do want to go back into the past a little bit and talk about, where we came from and some of your, starting places. So you could just elaborate on.
I think, maybe just what I'm doing at the moment or in recent times. So I'm heavily involved in sport. I'm the head coach of the Point Leo Surf Lifesaving Club, and I sort of race myself. This is sort of a picture of me and some of my teammates in surf lifesaving events and Ironman, surf Ironman, sort of Trevor Hendy sort of Ironman, not the Hawaiian Ironman idea. I'm in a band. I've sort of got a funk, jazz, bluesy sort of band that we do gigs around the peninsula. The research side of things has always gone hand in hand with my clinical and business career. So, we try and follow evidence-based practice, which is what's been proven in clinical trials. So that's what we do clinically. But as part of that, we conduct our own clinical trials. So through La Trobe University, I did run the physio program for a while. But the main thing for me at La Trobe is to run a research program where we do our own clinical trials, testing what works and what's not so effective for people with chronic pain, and particularly back pain.
Yeah. And so we'll delve into some of those areas when we get to the second half of the session. But I wanted to sort of go back in time. And my first question to people is normally, what was your first paying job? And I don't actually know what you're going to say here. Was it for me to play Monopoly?
Remember. I think I probably was working in the family business, to be honest, thinking back. Our grandfather, as you know, was a self-made man in stationery. Ron Grierson, R.H. Grierson and Company, and they had a retail and wholesale stationery business, and his unique selling proposition, if you like, was carbon paper. So he managed to get the unique or the exclusive deal for carbon paper when it was coming out in Australia back in
Pegasus carbon paper.
Pegasus carbon paper, thank you.
Yeah.
So he took us out there into the warehouse and we practiced wrapping reams of paper. So that was all done by hand and progressing to picking orders. So that was my first paying job. I then moved on to, I think I did stints at Red Rooster. That was probably the main paying job I did, Red Rooster. I dabbled in a little bit of personal training as well. I was one of the original personal trainers.
I remember the Red Rooster. I used to ride your bike out there in Alphington, but I didn't know you did personal training. That's pretty cool. Did you do a paper round? Yeah. I don't remember if you did a paper round.
I did. Actually, it's true. I did a paper round. I delivered the Heidelberger in my bike. For that. So that was actually my first job. Yeah, delivering papers.
I missed the carbon paper rounds. I must have been too young when that happened, but I obviously got involved later on and worked there for 8 years. So from there, you obviously went to university and you were studying these part-time jobs. You did have a bit of a sporting career. I think it'd be remiss of me not to sort of ask a little bit about that, because we all have pivotal moments in our lives when we have to make choices, and you obviously, were a successful sports person, and you had to make some decisions about that. So maybe just give us a bit of a synopsis of that experience.
Well, I think probably the main thing about so I did flat water kayak paddling, so the Olympic kayak racing sport, and I ended up going to the World Championships, the Junior World Championships, in that event, and had some success in the 4-person kayak. And yeah, like I came back, and well, the choice that I made was really the the Olympic coach at the time said to me, "You can get a spot in the 4-person kayak for LA, but you're not going to be able to do anything apart from study and train." And I just discovered alcohol at the World Championship closing
In
ceremony.
Bulgaria, it was Bulgaria, wasn't it?
Bulgaria, Sofia,
Yeah.
and I just started surfing. So I said, "Look, to be honest, so I just said stuff it." But actually, if I'm honest with myself, I actually went down to the squad, and I didn't get an amazing reception, and I was just too intimidated, and so I took the easy path, which in retrospect was probably the right thing. But I think probably the main thing from sport is that it taught me a lot about discipline and applying myself and getting results, from that application. So that's sort of the real key narrative, I guess, from that phase of my life.
Well, and the thing I remember about those times is that, obviously that was a big passion. You worked hard to get a result and you did well. But, there was other choices to be made. I mean, back then, flatwater kayaking was there wasn't much sponsorship, probably more now than before, but it didn't lead into anything, whereas now it leads into a lot of surf lifesaving and other sports, or vice versa.
Yeah.
So it's very little known. It was a very tough career choice to make if you can do that and not study at university. So
Yeah.
So then you studied for a lot of years, I know. But what was your first sort of physio job? Was it in a clinic somewhere doing, internships or
Oh,
placements?
I started working at Bethesda Hospital, which is now Epworth. So they had I did decide that I wanted to go into the hospital side of things, and the reason for that was to develop. It's an old-fashioned choice for physio these days. 70% of physios go straight out into private practice. But I still think that getting a solid grounding in a reputable organisation within a system helps you to develop in a supported environment those key sort of skills of communicating with the patients, communicating with other professionals, and just developing your basic skills, which the undergraduate program really doesn't teach you. So, so I did hospital work for 2 or 3 years, and look, I did get pretty frustrated with just the bureaucracy in the system and how it wasn't really oriented towards helping patients in my view, not in a very individualized way, in sort of a mass sort of system way it was, but not in an individualized way. Then I started work in private practice after about 3 years.
Yeah, cool. And so how did the life care opportunity come about? Was it a friend of a friend, or did you meet somebody, or just a random connection? How did that happen?
Yeah, well, it was random. So in 4th year physio, I did my elective clinical placement at Prahran Sports Medicine Centre, which is a sort of an inner city, at that time, the premier sports
how'd you get
medicine
there? That
centre
would have been like
in
in
Melbourne.
demand.
It was just random. It was just complete random. I got it. And the people there, Michael Kenahan, who you know, and some other people. I was there for 5 weeks, and that's really where I learned how to be a musculoskeletal physio. It was an amazing experience. So I always wanted to go back to there if I could. And yeah, as it turns out, I made a few inquiries. I started actually just after hours, doing 6 till 8 on a Tuesday and a Thursday. So just sort of got my foot in the door, demonstrated that I had some skills and capabilities with patients. Michael and some of the other people, Bernie Simi, offered me a role full-time once I left the hospital system.
I thought it might have been, Michael came to your Full Frontal concert or something and was so impressed with your guitar playing abilities. He's
Might have had the opposite effect, I'm not sure.
That's right, it could have been. So life care was a long term thing. I mean, you were there for quite a while, so it must have gone through many iterations and other projects happening on the side. I know you continued your sort of academic qualifications. So maybe talk to me a bit through that. What how was that process for you? What did you learn? Was it um, sort of
Yeah, look, you're
things
right.
that would help
It
you?
started off as this niche sort of sports medicine series of practice, about four of the practices, and great learning environment, very supportive collegial sort of environment. And then the Life Care brand is actually a franchise company that started off in WA, run by this fellow called
Ah,
Dennis Boyd,
I didn't know
and
that.
they
Oh.
came across in 2000 and bought out Life Care. Um, at that stage, I'd already started experimenting with my own treatment models within Life Care and supported by Michael. But yeah, sorry, within Prahran Sports Medicine Centre, supported by Michael. And I'd sort of developed my own sort of referral network and group of practitioners working under me, but within the sports medicine group. Lifecare came across, took over, bought out Sports Medicine Centres of Victoria, and and basically started setting up the franchise sort of model. So it then went through, as you say, all these different incarnations. It listed a couple of times on the stock exchange. There was some big, heavy hitting CEOs who came in, big personalities. Um, Michael stayed there. I stayed there. We were one of the few people that actually went the journey through all of the different incarnations for whatever reason. Yes, I learned a lot about what to do and what not to do from a business perspective from
Mm.
Michael and also some of those CEOs. And yes, I was there for about 15 to 18 years on that journey. I was actually not a business person at all. I was actually ideologically opposed to business. I thought I'd never be a businessman, but slowly over time, because of my desire to help people get better and also to support my research, which was sort of growing in parallel at Melbourne University with my work there, I realised that business could be a vehicle to support my research program, my research ambition. So I
Mm.
started just slowly developing those business skills over that time.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you were successful sort of in the early days. I mean, you said you had a referral network, you had people working with you, and you set up your own methodology within the practice, which obviously is, it's doing extra. It's being motivated and, putting the extra mile in rather than just rocking up to your physio shifts and doing them. So you obviously had that ambition
Yeah,
to
and look, and
progress.
that's to the credit of Michael, and that's sort of private practice. Private practice in physio is quite a flexible um, model, and there's lots of scope for innovation, even though it was a big company. Michael did give me quite a lot of latitude to experiment and do things, and so that I guess, is the options for innovation in private practice, which I did try in the hospital system, and that was one of the reasons why I left because I wasn't given that flexibility and that opportunity.
Ah, interesting, interesting. And so, where did the sort of specialisation in back pain come into it? Was that always an interest, or because I would imagine that from your sporting history to be like, oh, I'll go into elite sporting, treatments, but
Mm.
it didn't go that way. So, what brought on the back sort of interest?
Without going into too much detail, I was sort of working with some local orthopedic surgeons in ankle pain, and I was sort of on the cusp of looking at an AFL job as well. Um, so I developed these sort of parallel interest in ankle injuries. I think the thing in physio is that in private practice there was, and I still think there is, an opportunity to sort of label yourself as having this sort of special interest in something and really pursuing that. So I was doing that sort of with ankles and sporting surgeons and all of that sort of ankle rehab. And I had this back pain interest, which basically came from my own back pain. I had a back pain problem when I was about 20. Um, and I just started reading more and more research through my academic side of my work at Melbourne Uni. And I just made a decision. I remember the night where I had a meeting with a surgeon the next day, and I just said, look, I'm going to cancel that. And I upset a few people, and I just said I'm going to just focus on back pain. And so that's what I ended up doing my master's on, and then my PhD, and then the research team, and so on. So yeah, that happened. I was probably out about sort of 6 or 7 years when I decided to have that special interest in back pain.
Do you think it's necessary to specialize, and do you think it's a good idea, not just in physio but in other areas? I mean, business.
Well, it's an interesting point because certainly in physio, there's two different streams. There's like physio, the undergraduate degree is becoming progressively more and more generalist and losing a lot of those specialist skills. Um, and I'd say that that's true with the profession in general. But then there's this specialisation program where you can choose a specific stream, which I've done, and become a specialist physiotherapist. Yeah, my approach is always to drill. Pain is a complex thing, and it's fine to be a generalist, but if you really want to be the best that you can be in terms of helping your patients, because it's complex, you have to get that specialist knowledge, I think, and it's one of the threats to the physio profession about it becoming too general. So yeah, that's my personal view. Specialisation is definitely the way to go if you're working in complex areas.
Yeah, it's sort of. I don't know if this is the true, but it seems to be going the way of like because physio is such a big deal in Australia compared to other countries, I believe, and
Mm,
your physio is sort of like your GP for medicine. It's like if you've got a
mm.
musculoskeletal injury, you go to your physio, and he goes, "Oh yeah, this is probably it," and then sends you off to I don't know Jane Rooney for knees, and Jon Ford for back pain, and someone else for Aiden for something else, and so
Yeah.
it's a triage sort of with the generalist, and then the specialist profession. So is that sort of accurate? Do you think?
Look, I look to a point. It depends on who you see and where you work. I think. Um, I mean, you're obviously connected into my network, which is where all of those people and contacts have come
Yeah,
from, and you obviously do some work for Life Care as well. So you're sort of in that sort of upper niche sort of group of specialist physios. Whereas I think just out in the suburbs, I don't know. I think it's quite variable, but there's definitely you'll go to a physio in the suburbs, and particularly in the country and
mm,
in regional areas, and you'll just see the physio, and
yeah,
they'll sort of try and fix everything without sort of necessarily referring to those specialist physio services.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And some of those people would have specializations in particular areas without being a specialist trained as well. They just have an
Special
active
interest
interest,
is, yeah, it's sort of
special interest. Yeah,
the word specialist is quite a political sort of hot potato. So yeah, special interest is the technically correct way of saying. And
yeah,
yeah, look, and they do, but I think probably the dominant paradigm in physio and most allied health is that most people are sort of generalists, which is sort of fine. But if at the end of the day, if a patient's not getting better, rather than just continuing to treat them, you've got to look at triaging onto other options. And I would argue that a specialist is the way to go
yeah.
in that situation, which is what obviously happens in medicine.
Mm. So tell me a bit about STOPS. So STOPS is, the research, or part of the research. Maybe just delve into that a little bit because not everyone goes down that rabbit hole of research academia as much as yourself. So what draws you to that? Is it the veracity of the results? Is it the pushing the industry forward? Where does that motivation come from?
Well, it just comes down, like my primary sort of value in being a physio is just to help patients fulfill their potential. And to help patients fulfill their potential, one way of doing that is to help practitioners fulfill their potential to be the best practitioner they can be, because then they're going to help patients. And so my input is having a much broader sort of reach. Um, and the thing about physio is that there's lots of trends that come and go in waves, and sometimes historically, and we're going through this at the moment, as I sort of alluded to earlier. Some of that really foundation, what I would regard as essential foundation knowledge around things like manual therapy, how to do manual therapy technically, when to do it with which patient, and how to actually sort of reason your way through a complex patient using your hands and manual therapy skills is sort of has never really been very clearly and simply described, and certainly not tested in a clinical trial. And there's other approaches in physio, exercise-based approaches and so on. It's the same thing. It's not clearly described, in a way that a physio can pick it up and read it and go, okay, well, if I get a patient that presents with this, 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 and this, I'm going to do this, 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 and this, and that's going to get them better. So STOPS was what we call this individualized physiotherapy approach. Assess them, comprehensive assessment, work out what the key problems are, and then individualize your treatment based on those key problems. And so I developed the protocol based not on my work, but on the experts in manual therapy and different types of exercise approaches from 20 years ago. But I operationalized that all through sort of an algorithmic sort of treatment manual, and then we tested it in what we call as a randomized controlled trial, so a clinical trial compared to the guideline-based supposed best practice. And so we published that in 2016, and that showed that this individualized approach to providing physio was much more effective than guideline-based treatment. So that's one of my biggest achievements for sure.
Yeah, it's amazing, and I presume this is the basis for the business you've created today. Would that be fair to say? Yeah.
Yep.
So just
it
before we
still
get
is
onto
the
that,
foundation of our clinical approach. Yep.
yeah, before we get onto that, I do know that you also worked in, I guess it's pseudo government in work cover or WorkSafe, I should say.
Yep.
And so, how did that come about? Because that's sort of, it seems like an unusual departure. It's in the same industry as what you're doing, as assessing pain, I think. But how did that come about? I mean, how do you get into that sort of industry when you're working in a physio clinic?
That's a good question. I sort of fell into it. I mean, the people who I see clinically with complex low back pain problems, most of them tended to be people who have got a workers' compensation claim. So because there's a lot of complexity around that with the compensation claim, with the employer, with the nature of the injury, which is often due to manual handling, and they had sort of fairly severe injuries. It's a very complex area that I won't go into here. But I developed a lot of expertise in workers' compensation systems and how how to treat workers' compensation patients. So yeah, look, the job came up, and I just thought I'd give it a go. Again, it's an opportunity, because what we did was we rang up physios who were billing workers' comp patients a lot for a long period of time and tried to educate them. So it was sort of, I guess, part of that an extension of the role of trying to educate practitioners to help them be better versions of themselves clinically, so that the treatment outcomes would be better. Because it's fair to say in workers' comp, if you're over-servicing the patient, if you're seeing them for a long period of time and they're not getting better, it's actually not helping the patient. It's arguably causing harm to the patient. So it's probably an extension of that concept of helping patients through helping practitioners.
Oh, okay, so it was more of an educative system. I didn't realise that. And did they come to you?
Yeah.
Did they seek you out because you had some expertise in that area already, or did
No,
you see
I
an
just
ad?
applied. I applied
Oh,
for
so
the
they
ad.
advertised.
I
Yeah, okay.
applied to an ad. Yeah, they were a bit surprised that I applied. But yeah, so I ended up staying there for about 15 years.
Yeah, a
Yeah,
long
and I
time.
enjoyed the process and got to know a lot of really good people on the clinical panel.
Yeah, and probably fortuitous for the future career you probably didn't know you would have then. But then Lifecare made some changes or went through their another iteration, and you decided to exit. And this is what I'm really keen on talking about is you're working for a company, but I think were you a unit holder at that stage, or was that later on? Like, when
Yeah,
did
like
that
I had
come about?
a small shareholding in the business. So in the Sports Medicine Centre group, I had sort of, it was a complex ownership model. It was a bit messy, but I effectively had a profit share arrangement within sports medicine centres with that little niche service I'd set up. And so Lifecare, gave me a small parcel of equity in the Lifecare. Can't remember whether it was a unit trust. It kept sort of changing, as I said, but yeah, look, what basically happened. Look, it probably got to the point where I'd learnt what I could learn from them. I was getting frustrated. I think there was another takeover sort of on the horizon, and I just thought it was pretty harrowing. Uh, we,
Yeah.
we
Here
had
we go
some
around
pretty
again.
brutal.
Another
We had
listing.
some
Yeah.
pretty brutal CEOs come through, and I wasn't sure I was up for that again. But look, I think fundamentally, from a values perspective, we're dedicated practitioners seeing these workers' compensation cases, and they're pretty down and out people in the outer suburbs like St Albans and Bundoora and Boronia and so on. And then the life care people were sort of more traditional physios, sporty, a bit alpha male if you like, for the men who were there. There's obviously females as well. Um, and from a leadership perspective, there was just a bit of an incongruence of the values. Like our values was very focused on just helping the patient as the primary thing, and the commercial side of it would naturally fall into line if you help the patient optimally. And look, life care is about quality treatment, but it wasn't quite as pure. Like going back to that idealistic sort of thing,
Mm.
wasn't perhaps quite as pure. Maybe that's my bias, my lens. But I was also restricted in what I could do and how much we were valued as a business, and from a research perspective, really restricted from an administrative and systems perspective. Um, so all of those things just led to it had just sort of come to the time, and I have to thank Michael Strinsos, who was a physio who I mentored from a student placement, the same as me. I mentored him up into
Oh,
the
wow.
the
Mm.
co-direct into running one of the practices within life care, and we basically exited the company, got a good deal on the sale, and Michael became the co-director with me of Advanced Healthcare.
And how many practices was it three when you started or
It was four, I think. Might have
four?
been three or four. Three or four, yeah.
Yeah. Because I remember when that
It was
happened
quite
because I was
small.
working with life care and but four's still a reasonable amount to start with. I mean, that's a big step. I mean, you're
Yeah.
financially responsible for it. You're got to make all the decisions yourself, all
Mm.
your own systems, all your own legal models, and and obviously you're expertly trained as a physio, but they don't give you training in business. But I mean, you did
No.
training inside the business. Was it a bit of a shock? Was it harder than you thought? Was it better than you thought? How was the transition for you?
Oh, look, Michael and I were pretty strategic. We're sort of really lucky. I'm a pretty conservative businessman. I don't make change unless it's pretty well considered. And so really we were sort of planning on this for about a 12-month period. So we were planning the systems changes that we were going to make. We were looking at the front desk software we were going to use, um, and other sort of programs that we were going to use. The business model, which essentially was a profit-driven model. So all of the units, so it was a unit trust, and the unit holders were paid based on profit distributions. There was no, including myself. So there's no. So I went from a pretty comfortable salary at Lifecare onto just a purely profit payment. So that was sort of scary. That was Michael's idea, which was sort of
Very
give him
motivational.
credit for that because well, yeah, I mean that's right. If you're not making profit, you don't get paid.
Yeah,
So
and not
yeah,
revenue
so we had
profit,
a
right?
lot. Yeah, so we had a lot of time, a lot of preparation, and yeah, we really hit the ground running, I think.
Just to remind me of that timing, was that you would have had kids and a mortgage then? Like you had like responsibilities, right? It's not something you can just do on a whim.
Uh, yeah, so it was 2014. Yeah, obviously we still had a mortgage. Um, yeah, my pay hadn't really gone anywhere over the 10 years at Lifecare. I've probably gone, well, certainly backwards in real terms if you look at
Yeah,
inflation, but possibly
CPI. Mm.
backwards in absolute terms, just because of what, I was not particularly commercially driven, and the environment was a pretty cutthroat environment from a pay
Mm.
perspective as well. Um, so yeah, had a mortgage, had youngish kids, sort of, some 8-year-old kids. Had just moved down the peninsula. No, we'd been down the peninsula for about 10 years,
Yeah,
moving down from Richmond. So yeah, we're still in that sort of,
you're still
you know,
committed, so it's
mid 30s sort of stage of life with a young
uh,
family.
it's a big commitment to do that. But obviously, you're not branching out into buying a winery and doing something completely different, although they do grow olives. But
No.
I mean, you're in your heartland, you know what you're doing, you're in the system, the practices you're already running, you've got to, so you had the network. It's a pretty comfortable move, if although still not without risk, obviously. Um,
Yeah.
and but you've obviously taken on the challenge and done very well with it, and you're now up to 7 practices, I think it is. But the
Yeah,
business
7
overall
practices. Yeah.
is gone leaps and bounds. And what I've noticed, if you don't mind me observing, is that you are a good business person, and
Oh,
I
thank
think
you.
I think part of that, the essence of the business person, why is because you are focusing on the patient, and you do have the veracity of the research to make a really great product, which then has good results, and therefore, like you said at the start, it sort of all then works out downline profitability and so forth. Um, so is that sort of been an easy run, or has there been lots of challenges? I imagine there's some ups and downs, like in normal business.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've obviously talked about this a lot.
Mm.
I think the first sort of 4 or 5 years actually were relatively easy. Like because we'd had all that preparation, we just set the wheels in motion, and we grew very rapidly without, it was just organic growth.
Mm. Well, it was new. No one was
And,
doing this back then. I don't remember anybody in that space.
no, no, there's
But
plenty of pain management programs, but so that's what it is. It's a it's a
yeah.
multidisciplinary pain management program. There's pain management's been around for decades, but
Mm.
mostly in the hospital system, in the private hospital system, in the
Yeah,
public
yeah,
hospital
true.
system.
Yeah,
There's a long
true.
waiting list in a lot of the programs. So we were one of the first private practice-based pain management programs, and yeah, with that compensable work cover TAC sort of, there was a lot of people on work cover and TAC who are not getting better, and no one knows what to do with them. A lot of practitioners don't actually want to treat them because they're complex. So yeah, it grew really, very very quickly, and it was reasonably straightforward. But I think over time, certainly in the second half of that journey, so that was 2014, so it's like 10 years now. Um, it's definitely been more challenging probably over the last 5 years as we've grown bigger,
Mm.
and basically there's more of a disconnect or potential disconnect between me and the people on the ground. When we were sort of like 20 or 30 practitioners, I was individually mentoring all of those practitioners. Um, had a really good connected relationship with them. Same with admin, had a very good relationship with all of the admin, and trained them all. But as we've grown bigger, and we're still on this journey, I sort of think I'm cracking the code every 12 months, and then I realise I haven't cracked the code. So yeah, definitely the last 5 years has been probably a bit trickier as I'm trying to negotiate that sort of. So we're now at about 70 practitioners and about 60 administrators, um, and it's all sort of run virtually. We don't have a corporate head office. So yeah, the second 5 years has definitely been trickier.
Yeah, look, I mean, businesses go through growing pains at different levels of the business, and that's the span of control issue. Is as you get to not being able to be hands on with everybody, you have processes and systems, and they fall down, and people you hire don't work out. It's challenging, and one of the things that I've found common between all the sort of businesses that I've talked to and all the friends I have is the people aspect is particularly difficult. In terms of staff, but also probably clients as well. But do you find that, or do you find technology and systems are also a challenge, or the market? Like, where do you find
Look,
the?
I think yeah. So I think you're right. The people are the foundation of the business, obviously, and
Yeah.
it's a bit of a cliche, but getting your recruitment right. Um, so in that early stage, I recruited everybody. I trained everybody, and the values of everyone in that small estate first 5 years was completely congruent. So everyone was on the same page. Really strong connected culture. Everyone pushing in the same direction. I think in that sort of middle part, so years 5 to 8, I probably, and this was when I was running the physio program at La Trobe, I sort of delegated on that recruitment and training. And so the people that were coming in weren't filtered as heavily as how I would filter them. Um, and so we got some people who, they're not bad people, but they're just not a good fit for our organisation. We're a very
Mm.
performance-oriented organisation and very values-driven organisation, and not everyone's like really seriously. Like if you're dishonest, you don't fit. If you don't have integrity or transparency, you don't fit. It stands out very clearly. So we started getting people like that being recruited, and the training wasn't really the way that I would train them. And we don't kick people out of the organisation. Once they're in, they're sort of in, and we try and work with them and rehabilitate them, and that
Mm.
caused a lot of pain and complexity. But interestingly, in the last sort of 2 years, probably the last 12 months in particular, and this is not your typical business journey, I don't know. I've got more involved in the recruitment and the training, and so now we're again we're sort of returning to that. But I've got a lot more efficient at the recruitment, heaps more efficient training people,
Mm.
and so what's that meant? What that's meant is that we're again getting back to that consistency of culture. Everyone's got the same values, and so it's starting to hum again pretty nicely. But
Does
a
does that
lot of
mean
people
that?
would say I'm micromanaging. That's the sort of that's the
Well,
downside of it potentially.
yeah. Look, I'll sort of reflect on what you're saying, and obviously we talk about this offline. But if you get the right people, then you can probably delegate other things, like system choices and like training and other things to them because they're congruent with the organization. Do you find that? Do you find that that's like the primary function that's the most important, and then other things you can let other people do, and you can delegate away because you can't do everything as you grow. I mean, you've got to
Yeah,
make choices.
look, well, what I did in that middle stage is that I did delegate. Like I delegated a lot. I delegated too much without enough systems. Well, I did have systems.
Yeah.
I had a lot of systems in place, but I didn't teach those people how to manage those systems sufficiently. And so I'd just sit there and complain, and people would get unhappy, and it would go through this sort of bit of a vicious cycle. Um, so since I've gotten more involved, I'm doing less delegate. So I'm doing the recruitment. What I've done is I've identified what people's strengths are and sort of match them. This is at an operational level.
Mm.
So really matched individuals much more effectively to specific roles where they can really shine. But I have, as I said, still been very hands-on in the recruitment, in the training, and where we're at the moment is I've realised that I'm actually really good at recruiting and training operations people, but I've been actually pretty bad at training management people, at training people how to manage. Because I thought it was a bit self-evident, or here's the system, there's a
Yeah.
manual, just go and implement that system. And I've realised that at a management level, that just doesn't come automatically to people. And probably more than that, the cultural leadership. This is Michael Canahan talked a lot about cultural leadership. It just doesn't come naturally to people. So I've had to. I'm currently. So I've got the training and recruitment of the operations people, but I'm really working hard now to train and support management to become really good managers. So to answer your question, I haven't been able to delegate as much as I would like at that management level, but I think I'm
Mm.
getting closer to cracking that code.
Mm.
But come back and ask me in another 12 months.
Well, it's if we had all the answers, then big companies would employ us to do it because there's
Mm.
it's a perennial problem, and not a problem. It's humans are variable, and it's a challenge, and it's a challenge to align everybody to the one thing. It's just very difficult. I mean, look at football teams, and then when they go off the rails, it's normally a misalignment of values and culture within the club. Between
Yep.
administration, the club, the players, the coaches. It's the same thing. Luckily, Collingwood's doing okay this year, so that makes us happy. So it sort of seems like Steve Jobs had this great quote about how when you look forward, you can't see where the dots are leading, and looking back, you're like, wow, those dots all seem to line up. Like, the research, the connections you made at Life Care, the experience in running businesses and so forth, and the mentorship you had, and then WorkCover all combined into this, you know, fabulous sort of business that was the right thing at the right time. So, I wouldn't call it luck. I'd call it hard work and planning ahead. But you probably didn't know back then that this is where it was going to lead. But
No.
congratulations for doing that. My last question is looking back and thinking about all of that, and let's say a young mentee, another Strinzos comes in tomorrow and says, John, what's the secret of success? What's the pearls of wisdom you would hand down? What would you say? What's the thing that guided you the most?
Yeah, look, I think there's two. Well, I think the main thing is actually um, just to take opportunities when they arise. So something will come up, an idea might come up, or an opportunity might come up, um, and just sort of take that opportunity and try if you can. And not everyone's like this, There are sort of more entrepreneurial. So I don't really consider myself an entrepreneur, but I'm creative. I'm sort of glass half full. I'm I look at something that pops up and I can see the opportunity in that. I've always been like that. Um, but not everyone's like that. But if you want to be in business, I think it's pretty important to be like that.
Mm.
And when those little opportunities come up, just to keep exploring and thinking about it, um, and look, people say find your passion. I mean, I think it's a cliche, and some people get upset about that these days. But I was passionate about helping people. So
Yeah.
when those opportunities come up in an area where it fits your values and you can have some enthusiasm about it, you tend to just work harder. You're not that fussed about how much you get paid for it. You just sort of keep working at it, including unpaid work. Um, and it just, as you say, it's not, I didn't have this, certainly early on, I didn't have this sort of linear idea about what I was going for. But over time, I did develop goals. But I think just by sort of making the most of those opportunities, making sure it's congruent with your values, and keep working your way forward, that's probably the key thing. The other thing is if you can find some mentorship. I mean, my mentorship was pretty unstructured.
Mm.
Michael definitely was my key business mentor, but we had an interesting sort of relationship. But I definitely learned a lot from him. So yeah, having a mentor, I had some mentors at university. Again, quite unstructured mentoring. The sort of mentoring that I'm doing with people now is very structured. So I really try and help fulfill people's potential and fast track them into whatever they want to do: academia, clinical excellence, specialisation, becoming a unit holder, a business owner. So that's very structured mentoring, but some sort of mentor, someone to give you some sort of guidance is probably the other key thing.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, also, I think your work ethic has to be, mentioned. I mean, you don't get there by being lazy. You got those
No,
opportunities, you got passion, but you also apply effort. I mean, do you work harder in the business than you did at Life Care, or was it kind of commiserate because you're doing the extra hours and the extra effort in the research anyway? So
Uh, look, it sort of goes through stages. I mean, when I was at La Trobe and really immersed with the course, the physio course and the leadership of that, I was not doing that much at all within the
in the
business.
business, yeah.
Now that I've dropped that, and I'm still getting big profit payouts. Now that I've dropped that, I'm working harder in the business. Um,
As required, I guess. Yeah.
I'm probably still working about. I mean, back in the early days when I was developing the clinical model, I was working really hard. I was reading heaps and heaps of papers. I was doing my PhD. I did my PhD full time while working full time.
Wow.
Um, so yeah, I think I'm. I mean, you're right, and that's going back to my kayaking sporting thing. Like I really learned how to apply myself through that sporting experience. And look, I'd like to think I've been able to do not completely obliterate the other parts of my life, like my music
Yeah.
or my life saving or my family. Like at travel, like we do a lot of outback travel. We've just come back from a trip just yesterday. Um, but yeah, my days are pretty full.
Mm. Well, I think it's
That's sort
just
of that's sort of
not
good.
wasting your time.
I would think that's good. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And look, it's I'm sure there's been ups and downs, but one thing I took out of that all of that was that you know you applied yourself regardless of the immediate return, and I think that that's a little bit missing in some of the culture at the moment. Is that I'm only going to do that half an hour extra if I get paid, rather than because it's valuable for me for learning, for progression, for the future. And I'm reading a book about Radek Sally, who started Swiss Vitamin or grew Swiss Vitamins to a $1 billion exit, and he had that approach. He was like he would always do more and extra and learn not about the money because he knew he was progressing, and the big kicker payoff for him was 20 years later. So and probably such as yourself. So but thank you for coming on the show, John. I appreciate your time. I know you're a busy man and you're a bit tired from your travels. And I'd like to say for people, if they want to check John out, we'll put some links in the show notes to his LinkedIn and so forth. But Dr. Jon Ford, thank you for coming on, Bob.
Thanks, Andy. Happy to do so. See ya.
So.